why, what and how of the APNIC Foundation. Thank you, Paul.
Oh. Hi everyone, and thanks for being here. It feels a bit funny to have a BoF and to be standing up in front of you and delivering a presentation like this, but I hope we'll have some more discussion. I'll just what I wanted to do was to ground as to why the foundation has been established. It's sort of quite a new thing for APNIC after more than 20 years of APNIC's life to be launching this new thing. So I think it's I hope it's well understood, but there's some background to it which I'd like to talk about. I actually wrote a series of 3 short posts on the APNIC blog that explains the foundation background and why APNIC has taken this move. So I'm really just going to, I hope to give some background, but it's not to fill the room with my voice, but hopefully to give a bit of background information to spawn the discussion. So APNIC, going back to the bylaws which founded APNIC formally in 1996, there's actually some parts of APNIC's mission which are all about actually how the internet in the region develops, and that APNIC is an RIR, but the reason it's an RIR and the reason it was established was actually to assist in the development and growth of the internet in the Asia Pacific, the Asia and Pacific Rim region as it was referred to then. So that's kind of like the underlying, the real reason why APNIC exists, and it's the thing that drives us. It's not just that we're doing the numbers function for no good reason, it's actually for the benefit of the internet and for the development of the region. So that's clear. We talk about the function being a service to the community as a whole, not just to members. We also talk about APNIC having an educational mission, so to provide educational opportunities and further members' understandings. And so that, I think, if you've known APNIC for over the years, that's really been something we've pursued for many years even through actually establishing APRICOT in the first place, and then the second APNIC meeting of the year, and the training and the sort of professional networking that we try and facilitate. The other underlying clause there is about seeking legislative and regulatory about providing an interface with government actually, so that we can help with the development of government policies and things that are of benefit to the members as we can. So there really are a few things in APNIC's original bylaws from 1996 which are about developing the region, and as I said, these things actually guided us right through the whole evolution of APNIC and through many of the things we've done. And there's some history here which just shows that far from just being an RIR, just doing the allocation function, we've actually been really over many years, and I think with great support from the membership and the community, we've been helping and trying to help internet development in a lot of different ways. And I won't go through these, but the slides are on the website, of course. The other thing that has guided APNIC is that, as you've heard about today, every 2 years we've conducted a survey where we're talking to the members in the community and asking for feedback and both assessment of what we're doing and how we're doing it, but also what we should be doing in future. And actually, it goes back quite a long way, the sort of seeds of an idea where, for instance, in 2004, we actually asked if APNIC should establish a trust structure to attract funding for training activities. The answer was a pretty strong yes. 2009, should APNIC establish an open funding mechanism to support training and education for organisations in need, and that had a strong agreement. We had strong support for training and technical assistance in 2012, especially, but not only for IPv6 deployment. And then in 2014, we see that training is the second most important thing in APNIC priorities. And then in the latest survey, because we've come to this point and it's been under discussion for some time that we might actually go ahead with this new funding structure. In the latest survey, we asked about training and technical assistance, and we had training as a very important part of APNIC's services, and then lastly, the specific question that the member funds, yes to that answer as well. So that's really, to be honest, it's a long way of saying that this is what the foundation is all about. It's about actually attracting resources for APNIC's development activities, and you'll hear more about what those development activities specifically are these days. But it's about attracting resources so that we can do more of that without relying on member funds all the time and without being limited to the member funds that are being spent. And what you'll hear in this, in some of the things that Duncan has to say, is that we're actually seeing an increasing amount of interest and actually increasing amount of funding and resources which are being made available and being spent on internet development in the region. There was a time, I'll just comment here about the last 10 years. I think there was a time over about, say, 10 years ago when the internet was growing very fast and everything was rosy, and it was assumed that the competitive internet model was going to deliver broadband to everyone in the region, that the sort of ICT or communications for development thing wasn't so important anymore because the market was going to deliver it. That hasn't really happened, because although maybe the market's delivered a modem to everyone in the world, but meanwhile, while all of the people have been waiting to get a modem, the rest of the advanced countries have got faster and faster broadband. You know, the digital divide is still as big as it ever was. And so what I'm saying is that in recent years, there seems to be more and more developmental funding, more interest in providing assistance from government and development agencies to getting the internet, to bringing everyone up to a more level playing field. Anyway, so back in August 2014, the EC initiated this thing. They asked the Director Funding Foundation to, considering the developmental needs of the region and how we could fulfil those needs. And so over the last couple of years, this has actually gone ahead. There were quite a few options considered, and as you might have heard, we have now got to the stage where we do now have a foundation, formal organisation registered. It's registered in Hong Kong, and it will be registered as a charitable, as a charity as well in Hong Kong, and it's ready to start actually work on this process of hopefully under the foundation banner attracting resources that can be used to further development programs mission, which is the sort of training and technical assistance stuff that you've heard a lot about. So the what is a developmental funding foundation. That's what the EC asked for. That's in line with APNIC's original mission. It's to support and extend the development work that we're doing. Local resources are often not available. External resources might be. And the point here is actually to provide some separation of the funding channels from APNIC membership and from other sources, and to manage them in a transparent way. So the developmental needs of the region, I think actually across the community and at APNIC, we're getting a pretty good idea of the developmental needs of the region. And I actually think, we don't know everything for sure. We see a lot, but I actually think the BoF that we're holding here could be a very good way, if we continue this discussion, to really continue to refine and for all of us collectively to better understand those needs. So, we're talking about training and education, we're talking about fellowships, professional support, we're talking about community networking through NOGs and other organisations. Direct technical assistance, which we've been asked to do increasingly actually in recent years. Infrastructure support includes things like IXPs, root servers. More to this, there may be some of these things that are much higher or lower priority. So that's the discussion that we need to have, I think. And the methods for fulfilling these needs, as I mentioned, for the last couple of years, there have been various things. There have been options which have been looked at primarily by Duncan in his. We've even got a logo. You might have seen it. It's a nice adaptation, I think, of the APNIC logo for the APNIC Foundation, and it's now formally registered in Hong Kong with this mission, which is part of the registration. It's to support internet development in the Asia-Pacific region through training, education, human capacity building and related projects and activities by fundraising in support of activities delivered by APNIC and partner organisations. Now, the APNIC Foundation actually is an organ or a function, a part of APNIC. APNIC is the one member of the foundation, and the foundation exists for APNIC's for the support of APNIC's development program. Now, we might add some other members to the foundation in future. That's up to the foundation, but primarily the APNIC Foundation is for APNIC, and that means it's for the APNIC community. It's to serve the roles, as I've said, that APNIC has had. Structure, it's a non-profit company now incorporated. Single member is APNIC, as I've mentioned. There's a board of directors which is appointed by APNIC, and we're going through a number of phases now in terms of establishing that board, and it will be developed over the next few years. And there will be an advisory brings the kind of organisation. The function of the board of directors is actually fundraising. So the board of directors ultimately, when the full board is established, the function will be to actually provide funding, and that's quite a usual kind of orientation for a board of a foundation like this. Technical and development expertise. The funding process, at least in the first case, the foundation is very much oriented towards projects. There are many projects of various kinds which are going on in the development world. You would know about initiatives that install undersea or continental cable networks, which are funded by people like the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, or others. We see a lot of opportunity where those things are happening for projects to be developed to make sure that internet services are being properly developed and architected and provided in a secure and proper way. You know, that's a sort of project, and as I won't steal Duncan's thunder here, Duncan will talk about some of the specific sorts of projects that we're seeing as possibilities. The idea is that the investors put money into the foundation. The foundation itself is really a funding organ. It does project development because project development actually is a fundraising thing. The foundation develops projects for funding. Those projects are actually then carried out. They're managed, initially at least by APNIC, with our technical expertise, our capacity as an organisation, providing governance support, but also with partners. And we know there are many partner organisations around the region and around the world who are working hard on similar projects with technical expertise, with networks and resources. I'd even include the National Internet Registries. Some of them have a strong development interest. Many different partner organisations where we collaboratively can run projects. And the idea of the foundation is absolutely for money that comes into the foundation to fund activities which are not APNIC activities exclusively at all, but can be carried out by many different partners, community members, community trainers, community organisations and others. And funding resources, I've touched on some of them, development agencies, development banks. We've got a long with IDRC in Canada, with CEDA in Sweden. We've worked with World Bank and ADB more recently. There are foundations and philanthropists who are increasingly interested, as I said, in addressing this digital divide, which still exists. People like the Hewlett Foundation, the China Internet Development Foundation, there's the Gates Foundation, there's a bunch of them. National governments are some development assistance in this area. And there are, of course, the corporate CSR funds. So when you put all of those together, there really are many sources for which are candidates for supporting the foundation. Many partners, I've already mentioned a number of them who we would be looking to work with. Many of them, in fact, as you'll see, we work with already. So there are many individuals as community trainers, as consultants, as experts who are around in our region, and many opportunities for APNIC to work with and to make sure that the support that is received by the foundation is actually provided to people in the region. There are a few phases. This is the establishment phase at the moment. It's being supported and underwritten by APNIC by simply continuing development program activities in the name of the foundation as we have done, pretty much as we have done for the past many years. Incubation for the next few years, again, APNIC continues to support, but the foundation, as it processes funds, is able to maintain some part of the administrative overhead from those funds and to build up a cash flow or some financial viability. we might consider the foundation to be in its operational mode when funds exceed a certain annual amount, and we'll be able to offload some of the underwritten activities, the supported actions like fundraising, administration and so forth. And we think at a maturity phase, some years down the track, APNIC operational support is no longer required for the foundation. I would hope that APNIC would go on contributing to the foundation as a supporter, but the foundation should be sort of fully independent and sustainable with its own identity and its own operations, separate from APNIC, but still, as I said, always the APNIC Foundation owned by and managed by APNIC. So the development program, it's actually in recent years that we've taken a number of different activities of APNIC and put them together under what we call the development program. Duncan has distributed a sort of glossy brochure there, which is something that tries to describe in very human terms and in layman's terms, what are the things that link together the activities of the APNIC development program. I've really been talking about them since I started, but we look at a number of different parts of development in that development program. Capacity building in particular, that's a sort of technical development community word for training and education. Human capacity building is training and technical assistance. The development of and support of community, NOGs and CERTs, the small grants program and so forth. Infrastructure development I mentioned. Policy development, that also goes back to the original bylaws where we are asked to be providing advice and support to governments and to try and make sure that governmental policies and legislations work correctly. Policy development in the addressing space as well, of course. And capital development is the mobilising of resources that come through the development program. So the focus is absolutely on human capacity building, training and education. That's the main focus. As a charitable organisation in Hong Kong, the charity is an educational charity, but human capacity professionals who are building the internet in the region. And to try and define the focus, and this is something I think we could discuss quite usefully in this room. How do we actually define what's in and what's out? And what we look at here is something called the internet layer, and I think engineers understand that very well as sort of TCP/IP, but it's the ISP and IP network infrastructure layer addressing routing, peering, the stuff that actually builds the internet as we know it. Professional networking, community organisations and structures supporting the work of our members, because APNIC members are all doing this. They're all building the internet in some form or another. And it's really, I think, one way to describe it to people who are involved, for instance, in deploying cables around the region, under the sea and across the continents, is that what we want to do is to make the best use of physical infrastructure, the cables and wires that are going in, the waves in the air, to support stable, secure, state-of-the-art internet services. I have to say, we know very well that when we look at some of these rather grand infrastructure projects that are going on, the actual delivery of internet services using those cables really is often an afterthought. And what we see is that the internet services that end up being built still end up in the hands of the dominant or monopoly telco to sort of necessarily, no comment on anyone in particular, but not necessarily in the most secure way, not necessarily in the most efficient way or the most sort of state-of-the-art way. So there's a lot of technical expertise that we can rally to make sure that we do make the best use of physical infrastructure. Community development, I think we all know in this community that the internet is a lot about people, so it really is making sure that where the internet is being built, there is a recognition of the fact that there's a community of engineers, there's a community of expertise that goes into creating the right technical environment, the right policy and regulatory environment as well. So look, I'm sorry to start off with a long spiel like that, but I really hope to give you some food for thought and some insight into what's in our minds at the APNIC Secretariat, and I hope on the EC as well in setting up the foundation. So I'll sit down now and and hand over to someone who's really well able to talk about what's really going on out in the region. But I'll let Duncan do the introduction. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul. Any questions? As Paul said, I think certainly moving ahead with this BoF, to hear from someone who's out there in the community doing this type of work that Paul's just talked about. So we're delighted to welcome John Brewer. I think many of you know John already, working in the Pacific, and John's going to give a few examples of the development challenges facing the internet in the Pacific. So over to you, John.
Fantastic. So just a few words about me. I started working for an ISP in Kansas in 1995. I've had a little bit of experience in ISPs. I took a break from that and then moved to New Zealand in 2003, involved with the wireless scene and the NOG community in New Zealand straight away. Have been to a lot of NZ NOG groups, then got involved in PACNOG via the University of Oregon, who run a development program sending trainers throughout the Pacific. For the past several years, I've spent around a month of my year in various places like Pacific Islands, I think 12 of them by now, in Thailand, in the Philippines, so on, at network operator group meetings and universities teaching network engineering. And over the last year, I've done a bit of research on what I found in the Pacific, some challenges around operations of network and development of networks in the Pacific. The development work was funded by the ISIF, or ISIF Fund, which is an APNIC and ISOC and a number of other development organizations fund that helps people do interesting things to figure out how to improve development of the internet. So I've got a slide here. So teaching network engineering in the Pacific are that there's a real gap in performance monitoring. So we need to have some training to target telecommunications operators, research and education network operators, government network operators, so that they have a visibility of what's going on with their network. Right now, especially the end users, but even the carriers in most cases, have no visibility of what's going on the internet beyond their upstream. Jeff Houston gave a talk earlier today about how some parts of the internet are not reachable by other parts of the internet. Well, if you went to most of the carriers in the developing world, they really wouldn't be able to tell you how reachable their network is from the world. Now, there are free tools out there, like the RIPE Atlas, that exist to help. And the only gap here is in training. The tools are actually free. The hardware is free. RIPE will give carriers and any users, really, as many Atlas probes as they need. But we need to have some training to tell people how to use these to find out how their networks are connected to Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Amazon and Akamai and the largest, and of course how they're connected to other research and education networks, other governments in their regions, and their trading partners and so on. So I think that we could very easily develop training problems in network monitoring with free tools. Now, I've also found that in general, Pacific networks don't interconnect with each other. That's even when they're present in the same countries. In most cases, they have separate transit arrangements to the nearest major market, or not even the nearest major market. In a lot of cases, they'll transit to Los Angeles from everywhere in the Pacific. In one or two cases to Tokyo, in several cases to Sydney. You find offshore interconnection of IP networks as the standard and not as the exception to the rule. The lack of peering, the lack of local interconnection is bad for performance and resilience of the internet. What happens in the case of Vanuatu having a cyclone as they did? And they were very lucky in that their fiber connection and their landing station stayed up. But if they had been cut off, there was a carrier, a major carrier in Vanuatu, who at that point was not peered with the rest of them. So traffic between those networks would have stopped. In Samoa right now, there is no large capacity cable. If there is a disaster in Samoa, the providers are not connecting with each other locally. If they lose their connectivity to Hawaii, they're not going to be connected anymore. Not at all, even though they're on the same island. So lack of peering is bad performance and resilience. Unpeered carriers don't offer equivalent products. We need to train telecommunications regulators that an ISP that peers with other ISPs has a better product than an ISP transit to the nearest major market. We need regulators to help them develop fair regulated peering agreements. Voice interconnection is regulated everywhere. IP data and a lot of the same issues with existing infrastructure and cost to acquire new customers and network build costs and sort of asymmetric amounts of investment going on happen in the IP world, and regulators need to say, hey, this is the same problem we've seen in voice, we just need to make it work for data too, because the resilience of the internet depends on that. Now, big deal for the internet. We've heard throughout the day that we've changed the way the internet works from a model of everybody is connected end to end to 80% of the traffic going to CDNs. Operators, regulators, and education network users need to understand that network architectures are changing as a result of that. I guess here Cisco Visual Network Index is saying 2/3 of the internet traffic will be CDN traffic by 2020, but honestly in some markets it's a lot higher than that now. So understanding the shift in architecture is quite important, and understanding the fact that media like television, radio, and voice phone calls are all shifting to IP is also very important, because the regulation that governments achieve now for voice calls is no longer valid when those voice calls are all over Facebook chat, when they're all over Skype, when they're all over something that is going over IP and not going over a landline or a mobile phone. Same for television content. The broadcasting regulations. You need to have broadcasting regulations that apply to IP. If regulators don't understand that and operators aren't ready for it, if they don't have the training to understand the complete convergence and shift of traditional media to IP, then it's going to hold back the development of the internet. So, last off, network resilience and disaster recovery. As I said with Vanuatu, we could have had a disaster there, but fortunately their cable stayed up. We have a lot of other markets where we could potentially lose major connectivity because carriers aren't interconnected or because they're just not ready for disasters. We are seeing an increase in climate events and natural disasters. In every case, in the last couple of years, when there has been a disaster, there has been some interruption of telecommunications networks. We just had a major interruption of telecommunications in Australia last week due to a large storm. And the telecommunications networks were disrupted because they relied on data centers that didn't have sufficient diesel fuel lined up. They weren't expecting the grid to go down. They hadn't planned for it. Now, with regard to offshore infrastructure, in the case of Vanuatu, everybody in the world wanted to help Vanuatu as soon as the cyclone hit. Everybody in the world came to visit Vanuatu's websites. Guess what? Their DNS servers, primary, were on island, and connectivity to them was disrupted. Their secondary was on another very small island, because the two islands had said, hey, let's provide resilience for each other. And so they decided to provide their backup DNS, maybe in Mauritius. It was somewhere with a very small connection to the internet. And so when it happened that the primary DNS servers were gone for .vu, the secondary servers were overwhelmed. Island nations need to understand that having offshore infrastructure ready for a disaster is something they need to do. So I think we need education and we need collaboration amongst the Pacific network operators, amongst the Pacific education users, and amongst the Pacific regulators to understand what to do in the event of a disaster. And so that's just a couple of practical examples of how training could be done by APNIC Foundation in the future.
Thanks very much, John. A couple of, as he said, great examples there of the sort of technical challenges that the APNIC Foundation and the development program hope to help with in the future. Again, any questions? Anyone got any comments, suggestions? Okay, well then the last part of the presentation, we will give you, or I will give you some specific examples of some development program work that APNIC has been involved in. Paul sort of touched on a few of the partners already, but let me just give you four, I think maybe five quick examples of some programs that we've done. If I can get this working. The first of all is perhaps the best known of APNIC's development programs, the ISIF Asia, Information Society Innovation Fund, which is a grants and awards program. These are small grants of between $30,000 and $60,000 US. They've been provided, the funding's been provided by the Canadian government, IDRC, the Swedish government, ICANN.Asia, a range of organisations, and APNIC itself has substantially supported the grants and awards program. Started in 2008, since then 68 projects in 22 economies across the Asia Pacific. And I know there's one or two ISIF grant recipients in the room as well. In fact, John himself, as he mentioned. ISIF has invested in the APNIC community a fairly impressive $2.7 million. And I think that's a really great example of what the APNIC Foundation is looking to achieve, bringing important new resources from new partners and investing them directly into the APNIC community in a substantial way, well beyond what APNIC can do itself, but APNIC also investing along the way. Just this year, ISIF Asia, through support from IDRC, provided $450,000 in funding. We got 300 applications and ended up funding 10 initiatives, or selecting 10 initiatives for funding. And these covered a number of areas of interest to the APNIC community. They were operational research grants. There was the cybersecurity grant from ISOC. There were community impact grants and technical innovation grants. And the really key message here are these are all grants focused on technical areas of importance and priority for APNIC members and the wider community. And I've already mentioned the organisations that support ISIF. Looking beyond ISIF and its focus specifically into technical subjects of interest to APNIC members, IPv6, of course, is a top priority for us. For some years now, we've been collaborating with the UN agency, the ITU. ITU jointly funds an IPv6 program that we've been running with them. It operates at two particular areas of activity: direct country assistance with Laos in 2014, Mongolia in 2015, Cambodia this year. And this involves Philip Smith and Dean Pemberton, funded by the ITU, travelling to these countries and providing week-long direct country assistance to members and government agencies in those countries. In addition to that, this activity also funds Philip and Dean to conduct an IPv6 security workshop every year in Bangkok. And that's been going very well. That brings together 15 to 20 different countries, all brought to Bangkok by the ITU, where the technical training is provided by Philip. In addition to those ITU activities, we've been working with the Singapore government's IDA to conduct an IPv6 survey for ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian nations. That's a 10-nation group in Southeast Asia, where we've been looking at the IPv6 deployments in government agencies there. And as a follow-up to the survey, we did a workshop that was partly funded by ASEAN and the Singapore government agency, the IDA. And finally, I'll go into this in a bit more detail in another slide, but we have the World Bank training in Myanmar. In the area of security, one particularly interesting project is a partnership we have with the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. For those of you who know JICA, it's a very large, very established global development agency under the Japanese government. They've had an ongoing project in ASEAN on cybersecurity. In 2014, we joined the program with JICA financial support, and our security specialist, Adli Wahid, attended and provided specialist technical training into the JICA workshops, which are based in Jakarta, but includes Cambodia, Vietnam, and other CERT representatives from countries in the Mekong region. We continue that project in 2015 and now into 2016. The project finishes this year, and with a concluding grant from JICA, online training materials for CERT communities in Southeast Asia. These online materials will be done in the next few months and will be available in 2017. A great example of collaboration with JICA, which I should say has also involved agencies in Indonesia such as APNIC, which we're very happy in that. In addition to that, I definitely want to recognise as well the cybersecurity grant this year from ISOC as part of the ESIF program, which was won, if you like, by the new CERT in Tonga. And clearly, again, part of our work, development work to support the CERT community development in areas, regions like the Pacific. One of the sort of key aspects of all of this work and the development program, understand what's happening outside of APNIC's technical community. For those of you who know the international development community, it's a huge multi-billion-dollar global operation. There are national governments involved. Most developed country nations have, through their foreign ministries, provide funding. So Japan, Australia, Germany, the UK, the US, China, Korea, all provide major development funding into global development programs. Of course, there are the major development institutions like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and see what the development community is doing in terms of internet development. And here are just a few examples that we've been watching. We're not going to engage with all of them, but we certainly want to be aware of them because they do impact directly on our communities and the ambitions of our communities. So there's the Global Connect initiative from the US government, actually meeting this week in Washington at the World Bank. There's the Asian Information Superhighway initiative by the United Nations organization ESCAP in Bangkok, again by coincidence, meeting this week, in fact tomorrow, in Bangkok. There's a very new one out of Beijing in China. The China Internet Development received a grant for $35 million for philanthropists in Hong Kong to support their cybersecurity initiatives. And I've already mentioned the JICA projects on IPv6, but there's one in Myanmar. There are World Bank projects in Cambodia, Mongolia, and Bangladesh, and the Pacific. And the Asian Development Bank, which is essentially funding ICT development in almost every country in Asia. Getting to my final slides, I wanted to talk about the World Bank specifically because they've got major loans supporting ICT development in many of our partner countries. They supported routing and IPv6 training in Myanmar. It was part of a $31.5 million grant to the Myanmar government supporting telecommunications sector reform. These are the sort of projects that we will increasingly look to partner with through the foundation. And we're ongoing discussions with the bank about security and training and technical assistance in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia. Of course, these grants are national loans from the bank to the governments of these countries. So we work very closely, or the foundation will be working very closely with the national governments. And I think if anyone's in the room and aware of World Bank grants going to the countries from which you're from, I'm very interested to talk to you about that. So I think there are a few examples. If you'd like to know more about what you've heard this afternoon, Paul's already mentioned his presentation is available through the APNIC blog. I really invite you to go and have a look, click on the link and read in detail about what Paul presented in his first presentation. If you'd like to know more about the development program and find it online, it's available on the APNIC website in the files about APNIC under the corporate documents. So that's it. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions, yes, Aftab.
Hi, Aftab Siddiqui, Telco Networks. I'm just struggling to understand one thing. APNIC, as part of the member services, member to the services, is providing technical trainings. So what will happen to that? You mentioned the World Bank grant to the Myanmar and APNIC providing training services. That's what we do actually, right? So once the APNIC Foundation is established and start doing what we are planning to do, few of the things are just amazing for the setup of CERD, which is quite close to my heart. Been trying to convince a lot of people, but didn't work out. And few other things which will help a lot. But the thing is, IPv6 and routing and all those things which we have been doing for quite a long time, why do we have to change that today?
I'll answer that, Aftab, because I think it's a question about APNIC and APNIC's management more than about the foundation. The thing is that APNIC has been involved with training and technical development workshops and so forth for a long, long time, and our resources to do that are limited. We asked a series of questions in the survey. I didn't go through all of them, but there's a question about cross-subsidy, because in fact the APNIC membership subsidises in countries. It means it costs and it draws down on the APNIC membership fees. So what that means is that we're actually limited in how much can be done. So obviously the challenge of internet development in the region is huge. Cisco estimated something like a shortage of 300,000 network engineering staff around the region, something like that. I don't know where the number came from, but if you actually look at the scale, it's absolutely huge. Now, I'm not saying that the APNIC Foundation is the answer to that, but APNIC under the current model with a quite constrained subsidy coming from APNIC members also is not the answer to it. So what we want to do is to expand the APNIC development program. So one option there is to just keep expanding APNIC itself and APNIC staff and so forth. That would be one way to do it. Probably not the best way to do it in terms of the APNIC's location and so forth, or in fact in terms of APNIC's focus as an RIR. So I think, as I mentioned before, APNIC projects are implemented, APNIC Foundation funded projects are implemented by APNIC and or by partners. And so partners may be training organisations, so some of the training that you've referred to that may be increased as a result of the foundation could actually be carried out by others, carried out by community trainers. We've got a growing list of people, such as yourself in fact, who are community trainers. They're not on APNIC staff, but they're people who are willing and available, whose expenses, for instance, can be covered. So I think there's a lot to be seen. The point is all of these things aren't answered, and I think the point of having this discussion now is to actually expose some of it. Will have to be managed in response to the level of interest that we have, the number of projects that come along, and we'll have a few decisions to be made. One of the points though is to actually protect, kind of can do its thing, and if the foundation ends up with $20 million a year, then that's going to be it would probably result in the foundation itself establishing training and technical assistance and so forth to do stuff that's required under that.
Okay. So just to clarify for myself and to others, the training in the region will quadruple or expand exponentially. This is what I am assuming and just for the knowledge of everyone in the room, I was part of this initiative. I did 2 workshops in Pakistan as part of the community trainer. And what I can share is that region is lacking in training a lot. And that we have seen in the survey as well, right? The South Asian region is just struggling with a lot of stuff. And APNIC, because of the shortage of resources, haven't done a lot in that region. And the NOGs popping up here and there everywhere. And APNIC, the limited resource, is not doing enough. Because it's not a material thing to comment on that at the moment. That the training stuff will increase exponentially. It should not impact what we are doing today. In fact, it should add up. The level of support APNIC is providing to the NOGs, the level of support APNIC providing to all the other events, it should remain as it is. It doesn't mean that the funds and things happening there.
Look, that's right. I mean, we want, there needs to be continuity of what we're doing, and I think we need to take an effort. And that's fine. At some point, if it expands too far, then as I say, then logistically and from a management point of view, then some reshuffles are going to be needed, and that may mean actually moving things out of the foundation, but out of APNIC into new and different organisations. If we were, for instance, to have some support received for that we were able to mobilise for South Asia peering support, for instance, then there's no reason why that would necessarily come through APNIC at all, except possibly in coordination and so forth, but it could go straight out to NOGs and support NOGs and support the people who are involved with NOGs if that's the best way to do it. As I say, there's the sky's the limit and many possibilities are there. It just depends on the circumstances. Sanjay, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
sure.
No, I just want to, your conclusion is what I find the good thing that we're doing, that we're already doing now. So it's not going to replace it, definitely. Yeah.
Just a last sure.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so just a last comment with the mic. Because the APNIC is a member-driven organization, so there is a lot of transparency and there is a lot of clarity that what APNIC, the same kind of clarity and transparency will be in the APNIC Foundation work as well. So it's just a comment. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thanks very much for that. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I think, well, thank you again for coming along. We look forward to seeing you at future BoFs. Yes, Paul.
It just occurs to me there might be a call for a mailing list. There might be a need or a use for a mailing list which we haven't set up yet. But possibly, Duncan, can you offer an email address that anyone who's interested in joining a mailing list could send an email to simply say, please sign me up, and we actually can establish a mailing list pretty easily. We just don't have one at the moment. We don't have one of those paper sign-up sheets either for this session. So, Duncan, what's the email address that we should offer?
I'm trying to remember it. I think it's foundation@apnic.net.
Foundation@apnic.net. That.
Yes. We'll post it. Yes, we'll post it. But yes.
So we're not actually offering an email address right now that will work? How about Duncan@apnic.net?
Well, certainly Duncan, my email address, which is on the booklet at the back, Duncan@apnic.net. Please contact me.
Yeah, so really, if you'd like to sign up to a mail list, just drop a note to Duncan@apnic.net and we'll put your address onto the list when we set it up. Thanks.
Definitely. Okay, thanks again.